We're live on the other platforms. Now going to click for us to go live on Instagram. And we are also live on Instagram. So, hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Corey Empowers presents Mental Wealth Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, August 28th. And we have a wonderful guest this evening, Mr. Lance Curtis. Lance and I have known each other for some time now. He and his beautiful wife participated in a radio roundtable discussion that we had in Canton, Ohio, with Cap 3's radio station, Joy 1520 AM. And just all in an effort to increase awareness about mental health and mental health resources. We can talk about mental health generally, and it's such a large umbrella that encompasses so much. But on this platform, we are focusing on severe mental illness and the treatment and the resources and just general support for families and friends that have a loved one who is living with severe mental illness, or for any person that may live with severe mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. There are various diagnoses, but generally the smaller umbrella, we are focusing on severe mental illness. So Lance, so appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join tonight. I appreciate your career and your dedication and focus in helping people and their families, people who are living with severe mental illness, as well as their families, to navigate what I call the treacherous waters of the mental health care industry system. It can be daunting and overwhelming, especially when you don't know the first step, the first clue of what to do. And I believe that your experience and your career in this work will help to give some great guidance for those who just don't know, who are starting out or maybe suspect that someone in their life is living with severe mental illness or having some kind of mental health condition, and they just don't know how to help that person. So Lance, you have transitioned from the corporate world into the social service world. And I would really love for you to share with the audience today how you made that transition, what motivated you to make this transition, and how you have found it to be beneficial in the community.
So my experience background is I have done everything from working within the school systems to managing a Wendy's to being a sales service rep with a major corporation. In 2010, 2008, everybody knows what happened with the housing crash and everything. Well, at that point, I was working for the corporation, being a sales rep. And I had planned on being a counselor all my life. My undergrad was in psych. I had gone to work, do a master's, but I left the state to go into HR right when licensure was coming into play. So I never finished it. And they were trying to figure out what they're going to do with counselors, and they had to figure it out. So I finished the program, but there was additional courses for licensure, and I left the state. So after that fall, after everything crashed, it was like the job kind of changed. I didn't like some of the things about it, talked with the GM, and it was like, probably best to go. And I left and went back to school. Finished up. They took all my credits. I just had to pick up the courses that they didn't know we had to take when I left. And so then I went and worked at General Shepherd in a private counseling that took only a private insurance, and worked there for about 10 years, became a co-owner in 2018. And around 2020, around the time COVID was hitting, I just really had a heart. I'd always done community work. I had always been engaged, and I took some time off when I was sales service rep and just kind of focused on other things and kind of was burnt out, to be honest. And then after that, in 2012, I was like, man, there's the least of these, and there's some other ways I want to sit with people that's a little different than I have been. So I took a buyout from my partner, and that led me back into my journey. And then a job came open at a hospital. And it was like, okay, it's assessing. Well, a little extra money is always nice, right? Because I was doing some private practice work. I was doing other things. I said, let me go do some assessing. Went in as a PRN. That was my first experience with the medical model. which is different than the clinical model.
Mm.
And so in the clinical, like you would have my hour, right? And if you called after hours, it would say on the phone, and those who've ever done it, says, if this is an emergency, please call 911 or the crisis hotline. Well, that's what we did. That's what you do, right? Had no idea when you called that, what that meant. When I got into the hospital, I found out what that meant.
Wow.
As an assessor, I worked in the AR, I did intake, I did what's called level of care, which is different than a clinical assessment, which is what you do in private practice. That's where you get into all, like you'll do testing, you get into all really trying to diagnose, being very specific on what you're going to deal with, thinking in terms of treatment planning, all of that. In the hospital, a level of care assessment is simply this. Are you a danger to yourself? Are you a danger to others? Or are you unable to take care of yourself? That's all they're really concerned about.
So at the Gentle Shepherd, that was a private
counseling center. Yes.
Where you did the clinical model, which is basically like talk therapy?
Yes, very much focused on talk therapy. That's all it is, really. We would refer people to psychiatrists, but it's talk therapy. And in general, we dealt with bipolar. I had some clients who did have schizophrenia, but it's on a level that is much less than what you were talking about.
Okay.
It's not severe. When I hit the hospital, that's severe. So you're looking at severe schizophrenia, a lot of decompensation. And when I say decompensation, what I mean is those are people that are hearing a lot of voices, having a lot of delusions, maybe having some visual hallucinations, the interacting with unseen others. You have mania. I never understood. We have bipolar in the clinical model that would come to my private practice. And I was like, okay, yeah, they're a little elevated. They have their moments. But in the medical model, what was coming into the hospital, I've been Obama. I've been Obama's mother. I've been somebody else's mother. I've been somebody else's father. It's just extreme when they're in manic phases, running off. I mean, it is just really extreme. So everything is elevated times 10 in that model. But the focus of the medical model is med management, not clinical. So you had this clinical guy who was dropped into this new model thinking, hey, people going to mental health hospital, they're going to get clinical work. They may give them some meds, but this is going to be clinical. Well, I quickly found out that was not the case. Very first level I went in, my director of the unit looked at me and said, Lance, this is not what I'm talking. This is way too wordy, way too detailed. This is not what we need. This is a clinical assessment. All we need is a level of care. This is all we're concerned about.
Wow. So we actually have our first question from the audience, and I think it's a very important one because we can have, these various letters after our name, but the general public may not know or understand what the letters mean. And you have these different types of mental health care doctors or professionals, but don't understand their titles. So what you have after your name is LPPC-S. Please tell the audience what that means and whether it means you're a psychologist.
Okay. So I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor with supervisory designation, which means I can supervise other counselors who are on their way to either they're a licensed professional counselor and they want to become a private. When you have that second C, that means you can operate independently without supervision. And then the S allows me to supervise them.
Okay.
Now, I'm so glad. This is a great question because that's one of the biggest confusing things as I see, not only in my private practice model, but when in the medical model, is a confusion about that. So let's just break it down. So you have your psychiatrists. Your psychiatrists are about prescribing meds to manage psychological illness that is brain chemistry. They're back. So what that is so if I have schizophrenia per se, so there's certain things that are happening in my brain biochemically that certain medicines like risperidone, you may have heard of Invega, which is a long-acting injection, helps a person not have the voices and the audio and visual hallucinations, lessens the delusions. Then you have people who have mania, so you'll give them Abilify to stabilize their mood. You have people who have depression, so you'll give them the MROs and MRIs rather, which they'll tell you. You ever say, if you're taking this, if you're taking a inhibitor, don't take this medicine. That's what they're talking about to help man. That's what psychiatrists do. They're really not concerned about talking to you. They're really not. They just want to do the meds to manage the psychological illness. A psychologist can counsel, but their focus is more in research, education, and testing. So they'll do the testing. So like you may have heard of the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is the oldest and one of the best inventories to determine severe mental illness, regular, but also severe mental illness. So they'll administer those. They'll administer other kind of tests to make sure, here's what the diagnosis is, here's what the clinical work is, this is what it will require. Sometimes they will actually do the counseling, but many times they'll have master's levels working underneath them, or they refer or have LPPC-S working in their practice. Then you have your psychiatrist, your psychologist, then you have the professional counselors. Now, what we are trained in is in diagnosis and treatment.
Okay.
That's our focus, diagnosis and treatment. So
you would refer a person based on your diagnosis if you believe they may need meds to
correct.
A psychiatrist.
Correct.
Okay.
And a little commercial, if your primary care physician says, hey, you need these meds, you may need some Abilify, or you may need something to help, do not long-term allow your primary practitioner to prescribe mental health medications, because that's not their expertise.
You should go to a specialist.
You should go to a specialist, and that is your psychiatrist.
Okay.
Now, if you're going through like a crisis, something's happened, and you're sitting with a little bit more anxiety, yes, your primary care physician can prescribe that, and it'll be fine, and it's probably going to be temporary and short term.
Right.
But if the anxiety or the depression continues, and they're like upping it, and they're playing around with the meds, get to a psychiatrist. I would liken it to this: going to my primary care physician if I have heart disease. I'm going to want to go to a heart specialist, cardiologist who knows what he's doing, because he'll know what meds, he'll know what's happening in my bloodstream, all of that.
Okay.
Now, some primary care physicians can and have more knowledge. They may haven't been to that, but I always say go to a psychiatrist. If you are on psychotropic medication for longer than 6 months, I would say you need to find a psychiatrist.
Okay.
To manage that for you. And then you also have social workers, LSWs. The medical model is run by social workers. Now, I have one of the highest licensures in other than obviously the medical doctor, but the highest license in my hospital as a professional clinical counselor, private, and can supervise. I actually have to have an LSW observing and reviewing some of my work, because the model is driven by social work. And what social workers do is they link into the community. They grab from all the different agencies. So they're looking at, you'll find them in the hospital. If you've had a senior citizen go into the hospital, social worker's going to come see you. Hey, what do you need? You need this care. You need home health care. You need nursing home. You need this. They drive the hospital model. Right. Social workers can also do individual counseling, especially LISWs, but the LSWs can too. But the issue is they're not trained in it the way we are, which is why LISW, licensed independent social worker.
Okay.
So those are basically you'll have your psychiatrists, your psychologists, your counselors, which would be LPC, LPCC, your social workers, LSW, LISW. The letters, the alphabet soup can vary from state to state, but in Ohio, that's the designation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for breaking that down, because a lot of people ask those types of questions and still just don't understand what the differences are in knowing what path they may need to move forward in terms of treatment, or just discussing options for themselves or for loved ones. So I truly appreciate you breaking that down, the whole alphabet soup, so it can be more digestible for us. So, and Lance, it sounds like you did this big jump, from the corporate world to the clinical world to the medical world.
Yes.
What led you to this? Now you're in the medical model of same thing, helping with mental health conditions in a hospital setting. But what led you to that specific interest? You had interest in the community. You wanted to do more in helping your community. But why did you want to help your community in this way, involving mental health conditions?
So when I got there, I found truly what I would term the least of these. Those are the people that don't have a lot of agency, don't have a lot of support, that really the community kind of closes their eyes on. Mm-hmm. Everyone who or that person over there that is just bizarre, a little weird. And they're in the streets, and someone may not be dressed right. They may be doing any number of things, and you just drive by, or you look at them, or you cross the street. Well, those are the people that I see primarily in where I am today. And so when I got into and was doing the assessments, I'm sitting at, well, who's doing clinical work? Yes, they need meds. The meds are necessary, but where's their support? All the research shows that resiliency is tied up into your relationships. And what I was seeing was who was coming to the hospital. They had no relationships. Many times their family were done with them. So many of them are homeless. Now the step downs, which is that place where you can go between hospitalization and back out on the streets or into full community mental health, they don't even want to take the homeless anymore. You can't even refer them. Because they'll say, just like we say in our hospital many times, we're not a placement agency. We don't find housing for people. We don't find those. And you can't get stuck with someone 60, 70, 80, 90 days in your system.
What about the social workers?
And then the social workers try to link, but there's no linkage out there. You and I had that conversation one time about the housing issues that people with severe mental illness face. And there's not a lot of places that offer them the support. And I get that more from my aunt. I watched my aunt who had schizophrenia. And the onset of schizophrenia generally happens for females around the ages between around 21 and it can go up to 35, but 21 to 28 is really, really, really often hit. Sometimes in teenagers. For males, it tends to hit a little earlier, around 18, 19, into the mid-20s. Most people with schizophrenia have IQs that are higher than the general population. A lot of people don't know this. And so what I see in my practice at the hospital and when it would happen in my practice, you had these young people who look like they were going to walk right into the American dream. They're in college. They're in sports. Their lives look like everything's before them. And all of a sudden they have onset of schizophrenia. Then they're seeing things, hearing things, they're delusional. And the family's like, oh, what do we do?
Right.
And they start on this journey. Well, the thing about managing schizophrenia is it does require medicine, period. Well-managed medicine. It requires going to your doctor, following through. But when you don't have people, you're not going to do that. When you don't have a home, you're not going to do that. And what I watched with my aunt, because she had my mother, her sister, my grandmother, and we have a real small family, and it was pretty much me. And I was little at the time. I was 10, and but because she had that support, she would generally be med compliant, except every now and then I'd call and want to visit. She said, no, babe, not a good day. I know my body's here, but I don't think it is. So it's not a good day. And she did that throughout her life. When I was married, when I had children, she would say, hey, not a good day. Periodically, I had to go visit her. This is when the hospital, Mercy Hospital, had a psych unit. I would have to go visit her there every now and then. She would just need to get med managed. She'd come out, go right back to work. She retired from Hoover's, but I watched that. And so I began to ask myself the question as I was in this environment, looking at all these people, And we would ask them questions. Who's your support? Do you have support? Do you? And I'd hear again and again, nobody, 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 nobody. Family isn't around. Or the family that was supportive had no clue, no education, no understanding of what they were dealing with. And I said, wow, my aunt, she was able to manage and do as well as she did because she had people.
Yeah.
And so I decided at that point, I wanted to try to be the people as best I could in the environment within the limitations, which is why I went from being an assessor on the AR unit to director of clinical services.
And what is the AR unit?
That's the intake unit. So when you come into the hospital, and we are what's called an EMTALA hospital, which simply means it's an emergency hospital.
Okay.
If you've ever driven down a road and saw a hospital and it says no emergency room, they're not EMTALA. There are certain rules that emergency hospitals have to follow.
And the AR stands for what?
Assessment and referral.
Okay, assessment and referral. So you're touching on some critical points in terms of support, having family support or friend support, some kind of community. What do you say for those family members that, first, let's start off for those who are encountering the behaviors for the first time and they're looking for something, but they don't know what to look for. What would you say to that person?
First, what it will look like is you'll notice, because everybody they'll try to cover initially because they know, and you better believe your loved one knows something's not right, that something is now off. And that also includes with mania, or bipolar, which means you have really high highs and really low lows. They know something's off, but they'll try to cover. And then as it increases, and you may notice initially that you may notice them talking to themselves. There may be more isolation, so they may not be as engaged, specifically with schizophrenia. They may be a little paranoid, so they don't trust as much. They may say, hey, that neighbor over there is looking in our windows at night. Or, I was at my job. I can't go to work today because something's not right. There's things going on. It can start in school. If they're in school, you'll notice that they're having issues with the teachers more. They're struggling with peers. Their distrust increases because they are now having auditory and visual hallucinations, which is simply this: they're seeing stuff that we don't see.
Right.
And I specifically say it that way. A lot of people say, "Sure, you're having hallucinations." I'll say, "Do you ever see things other people don't see? Do you hear things other people don't hear?" Because who am I to say what's real and what's not? Yeah, we know other people can't hear it, other people can't see it. But if I'm sitting with you, and this is the difference between the clinical mindset and the medical mindset. If I'm sitting with you, I'm trying to bring you into a collaboration with me for your mental health. So as a loved one, you're trying to have your loved one enter into a collaboration with you, with the medical community and the clinical community to come together to help them with their mental health. If I'm coming in with judgment, with attitude, with well, you got hallucinations, which are all these are charged words. You're hallucinating. You're seeing things. You're manic. Those are very charged words. And if I'm just now beginning to experience this, when you start talking to me and using those words, that's going to push me away, not move me towards. So I always ask that. The other thing we want to remember is when people are experiencing this, now I have genetic high blood pressure. I just do. I've had it for a long time. I keep myself in such shape. The doctors said, hey, we're not going to give you medication for it, but you just got to always watch it. And as I'm getting older, I'm probably going to end up on medication now at this stage of life, but I haven't had to. But people know, no one has ever looked at me and said, you're high blood pressure. But we'll look at a person with schizophrenia and say, you're schizophrenic. We'll look at a person with bipolar and say, you're bipolar. Last I checked, you're your name.
Right.
You're not an illness.
Yes, it's part like dehumanizing people or limiting them to their diagnosis or a suspected diagnosis. Sometimes there isn't a diagnosis yet or treatment yet.
Right.
And I want to take that to this next question. We talked about the family member or potential support person who doesn't know what's going on and how they may learn more and see how they could be a partner in collaborating. You mentioned about family that has given up and don't want to be involved anymore. What
Mhm.
gets people to that point?
So usually the way it looks, and I've actually talked to some families that have gotten that, but we kind of try to reach out to everyone that we can.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of talk to some families. And usually what happens is when it first onsets, there is a resistance
Mm.
in the patient to medication, a resistance to the process, to engage, because there's so much stigma. Those meds change how you feel.
Yes.
They change how you think. If you're a person with bipolar, when you go on meds, mood stabilizers, your highs are not as high. Now think about it. Think about your happiest moment with the things that make you really excited.
Mm.
When my sons come home, that gets me now every time. And if all of a sudden, when they come, I'm driving home and I see them and I'm on this mood stabilizer and I see them, and instead of being like, oh, my boys, I go, oh, my boys.
Yeah. Loss of affect.
That affects you
Mm-hmm.
because now my emotion, and I know I'm different. And over the course of my life, to the degree I've been not med compliant, I may have spent more time feeling this way than when I managed. So family members have that initial struggle. They go and say the person finally engages in the treatment, medical model, clinical model. What generally happens with severe mental illness, though, is it's almost exclusively medical model.
Mm-hmm.
The clinical model is ignored. Now, what the research shows is that for best outcomes, you want the clinical model and the medical model working synergistically together. That gives you the best outcomes for severe mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
Because the clinical model, at the very least, what it brings is relationship support. And that relationship and that support can drive resiliency and may be the one thing that keeps that patient taking the meds.
Mm.
Or when they haven't taken the meds, to make a call and say, hey, I probably need to come back and get some things taken care of. So you need the two together. So what happens with the family is they get them in and they're like, oh, they get hopeful. Yes, this is going to work. They see the meds work. They go in the hospital. Many times they're pink slipped into the hospital. And we can talk more about that if you want, but they're pink slipped. So this may be the first time they actually are in a position where they have to take the meds. So they take the meds, they get better. And it's like the family's excited. They're getting their person back. And it's like, this is great. And then the person goes, I don't like this. And they stop being med compliant and they go back. Well, what happens with medications is, specifically with schizophrenia, when I stop taking the meds, when I stop and then go back on, I am literally impacting my brain to make my illness worse.
Mm.
So the first time I go meds, if I stay med compliant, I'm going to be at this level and everything is going to be, but the minute I stop taking meds, what will happen when I go back on meds, there's been some damage now, so that it's not going to be as effective and I'm going to be worse.
Mm.
So then that cycle begins and the family members live in that cycle over and over and over. And they may have, the patient may become aggressive. They may become extremely, they can get into self-harm, but they can also become extremely delusional. So they don't trust you. And it's really hard to deal with delusions because the thing about delusions is it's only paranoia if no one's out to get me.
Mm.
And in their lives, they think someone's out to get them. They can literally have a horror movie going on in their head.
Mm-hmm.
My very first weekend out of training at the hospital as a assessor, I got called to a code on the unit. And this gentleman had a horror movie in his head. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this great empathy. I'm like, man, that's got to be torturous.
Yes. It's like being tormented with the thoughts. Yes.
And he's throwing chairs and tables. And the first thing he was saying, like, take him down because they're frustrated. The staff is frustrated. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, man, imagine a family that's having to deal with that over and over till eventually you lose hope.
Yeah.
And then it's easier to let go and not see than to have it in your face over and over again.
And the potential danger
right
to your family member or friend.
Because it can be dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's usually not intentional.
Mm-hmm.
They're not intending to be dangerous.
Right.
That's a different psychological illness. That's a personality disorder. That is different. That's criminal. They are literally in their head with various levels of horror movies.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it, because I don't think that people understand generally some of the symptoms of people living with severe mental illness, which is my critique of community organizations that are responsible for developing programs to address mental health issues in the community, with the funds that they receive, from the state, from the federal government. But it seems that the issues that they select and design these programs to address are just for general mental health talk therapy type programs, or self-care type programs, versus addressing the needs of those living with severe mental illness. So for a family who family members, friends, support individuals who are looking for resources specifically for severe mental illness, how do you guide them? And we're frozen for a moment, but we'll see if Lance is able to come back to the screen. And I just want to take this time to thank everyone for coming on today and engaging in this conversation. Feel free to drop your questions or comments in the chat boxes, and as we see them, we'll bring them up into the discussion based on the relevance to the conversation at that time. We lost Lance for a moment, but we'll wait for him to join back through the link and to continue on with this discussion about resources that may be available in the community. As always, my number one go-to is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I encourage you to learn more about NAMI and the resources that it has available with its local affiliate chapters throughout the country, as well as Mental Health America. These organizations, as well as TAC, which is the Treatment Advocacy Center, focus directly with severe mental illness and providing supports and information and resources for families and friends that have a loved one living with severe mental illness, and providing community programming for individuals, whether it's peer support or family support. So take an opportunity to look into these organizations, find an affiliate near you so that you can tap into that resource and know that you're not alone. I encourage you to gather up all the information that you can, because you don't have to do this alone. I am going to see if I could send another message to Lance and get him back onto our live today, because he was providing us with some great information, and we want to continue to have him to provide information that can be helpful for you and your family and your community. So with severe mental illness, what you heard Lance talk about is the delusion and the delusions and the hallucinations. That is different than any other mental health condition. That's what creates the severity of the symptoms. And as you heard us talk about, the potential danger when a person is untreated, not medicated. So we have Lance back, and we were just getting
Sorry
in.
about that.
No worries. We were just
Don't
getting
know
in.
what happened.
It's the internet.
There it is.
Reception. We never know. We'll blame it on AI.
Yeah, there you go. They didn't want it out. They're trying to stop the message.
But we were just getting into community resources, or the lack thereof. And being that you work directly with individuals who are dealing with severe mental illness, what are some of the referrals that you provide?
So there's a statement in the hospital that discharge planning begins upon admission. Because we only have, generally speaking, it's a 5 to 7 day. When you go into the medical model system in these hospitals, because they don't have long-term anymore. They closed them in 1980. You can't find it. So for those who are dealing with family and say they're at that point and they're really, man, they need more, they need longer time. And maybe you've seen them come in and out. It's just not out there. There's no political will to fix that right now. And so just understand, average stays 5 to 7 days. That's all insurances are going to pay. And, everybody's got to make money, right? So that's what drives our system of healthcare. So just that's an awareness. And I know it's extremely frustrating. So what we try to do upon admission, we're looking at the agencies and we try to interface with agencies. Now, I just took over this position about 2.5, 3 months ago now. And so one of the things I'm doing is I'm getting certain parts stabilized. So I have stages of what I'm trying to do. One of the things that we did was I separated out the clinical and the discharge. When I started, and I had arguments with the people above me about this, because people say, I don't like discharge planners. The clinicians should do it all. I said, well, first of all, you're hiring social workers, not LPCs. So you're really not hiring clinicians. You're hiring social workers who can do counseling, not counselors. And so that's the first thing. And I said, they don't have time to do all that entails with discharging and do some clinical work. You need clinical work. Well, you can't do clinical in these hospitals. Well, yes, you can. I can do short-term solution focused therapy, CBT, DBT. I was just with a patient today that's severe, been in and out the system many times. They are now asking me, hey, talk to me. They just wanted thought stop technique. So there's a lot clinicians can do. So we've separated that out. We have what we call discharge planners. And what they're looking at, and they're familiar with and know, the community agencies. Step down. What step down is say you go into an acute hospital like ours. You're not quite ready to go back home or back into the community. So you step down into what is a version that's less restrictive than ours, because we're a lockdown unit. You're locked in. When you come in, you don't get out till we let you out. To what isn't a lockdown, and it's more social. They're working on more things to slowly get you back into the community. And they can keep patients from, and at that point, you become clients more than patients. In our hospital, you consider patients. In the hospital setting, you're patients because we do stuff to you. We give you meds. We do that kind of stuff to help you. You can probate and make a person force meds. You cannot force med counseling. You can't force counseling because it's collaborative. So step down is more collaborative than it is med management. By that point, we should have done the work to get you being med compliant. They really start focusing in on the support, the counseling, getting you ready into that, and then they release you. You can be there anywhere from 7 to 14, 21 days. Then when you have step down, then after step down, you go back into your community resources, which would be like in Canton, Ohio, we have a place called Coleman, Phoenix Rising, Ohio Guidestone, the community mental health agencies. Primarily, our patients are linked into community mental health agencies because private practice, number one, they don't take the Medicare, Medicaid. And number two, the level of acuity of those clients and kind of the way it works doesn't fit with the private practice milieu of the type of patients that you're having. We have an actively very severe schizophrenic. They're not going to, the person who is depressed because of life situations and need that counsel like that I had at General Shepherd are not going to be wanting to sit next to the schizophrenic because that schizophrenic will maybe be talking to themselves. So it's primarily community mental health. So we link them back into community mental health agencies. This has to be done within they have to have their first appointment within 7 days of discharge. So we contact them, we talk to case managers, we talk to the providers and try to get them linked into these services, both psychiatric and counseling services. Then we attempt to follow up. It's very difficult, specifically with many of our patients, because they're so transient. Because they may have a house today, but they may not have the house tomorrow. Because they haven't paid their rent, because they just came off this period of time where they decompensated and they weren't working, and now they're in this situation. Or they tore up the house, and now the landlord has evicted them during the course of the time they've been getting treatment.
Wow.
So we try to set them back up into the community and allow for a soft landing as much as possible. We also have IOP and PHP.
So tell us what those acronyms
I'm getting ready to do that. IOP is intensive outpatient. That is the clinical intensive program.
Okay.
That's where you do a lot of talk therapy. But what a client in that program will come, they may come Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
We have another.
I'm back.
All right.
I don't know where this is happening. I'm in my internet router room, so everything should be good. But I don't know what's happening. But anyway, so what they do is they come and they get that individual, they get that group therapy consistently. So they're forced on that day to go. We provide transportation, bus passes, whatever's necessary to get them there. PHP is partial hospitalization program, which means you add in the med management of the psychiatrist. You still go 3 days a week, but you're also seen by a psychiatrist that's doing the meds. So that's another program. So if you have a family member that goes into a hospital and you don't know, one of the things you can talk about, hey, is PHP available? Do you have a partial hospitalization program? Do you have an IOP program? Because what you need, can you step them down and can they get them into that kind of program? Because what you need as a family member is levels of support.
Right.
And those all offer levels of support and treatment. I would also encourage you, because I know I'm developing a program at our hospital to do a much more intense family component where we're going to be meeting with families. I now at visitation have my therapist meeting with families. I'm meeting with families just briefly, answer any questions to help them understand how to navigate. NAMI has great family programs.
Yes.
You know, they have great family programs and support systems. I encourage you to get in them. Because in the same way as your loved one struggles because they don't have relationships and support, you will struggle because you don't have relationships.
Right. Yes.
And so I encourage you to engage in that. But so a good flow would be, you're in a hospital like ours, acute hospital. You come in, they come in 5 to 7 days, get med managed, get stabilized. Come out of that program in either a step down or into an IOP or PHP, which will provide the additional support. And you can ask for those, and you can look in various areas in your community that will have them. But make sure you're asking the questions, because what I also find is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you don't say anything, if you're not advocating, it'll just be whatever.
It'll be what it is.
You
mentioned more than one time about coming into the hospital. And I've heard some advocates kind of criticize the system in terms of a person's ability to walk through that door in order to get treatment. So simple phrase, walk through that door. But then there's the pink slip situation. Tell us what these are. How are they different? And how does a person walk through the door or are pink slips to receive services at your hospital?
So I'll start with the walk through the door. Generally speaking, the walk through the door for an actual person who has clinically significant mental illness that is severe. Not necessarily, because many homeless walk through the door because it's a safe place with meals and food. So I'm not talking about that. Also not talking about the people that use meth and drugs, because meth psychosis is a real thing. And they'll come in sometimes. But we're talking about a person. So they know something's wrong. The family's been talking to them. Hey, you need some help. There's this hospital. Let's go. You can walk in. They'll do an assessment and they'll get you the help you need. And they are convinced to do it. So they come to the hospital. They come into the intake unit. On the way to the intake unit, they'll come in and they will be told, once you walk through these doors, you are locked in until the level of care assessment is completed.
Mm.
You can't get out. That assessment must be completed. Many times we'll have specifically if you're dealing with schizophrenia, various levels of psychosis or mania, they'll walk on a unit and as soon as those doors close, they are off the chain.
Mm-hmm.
They're aggressive, angry, frustrated. Sometimes they'll be crying. It could be any number of things. So we have to de-escalate to get to the point where we can do the level of care. So let's say you have a patient who comes in, level of care, they are a danger to themselves and others. The psychosis is very intense. They can't meet their daily needs, but they still want to leave. I'm not signing in. At that point, we can pink slip. So that's the first way. So you can literally walk in the door and end up pink slip.
So pink slip, involuntary commitment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And an involuntary commitment is when the decision is made that you can't make a rational decision for your own care.
Mm.
So you say you want to leave, but you're really in no position to make that statement.
Okay.
So you can be pink slip. A pink slip is a 72-hour hold for evaluation and assessment, evaluation, and kind of triage treatment to stabilize. That 72 hours is 24-hour periods, and weekends do not count, and holidays do not count. So if I get pink slipped on a Friday, that pink slip, Friday to Monday, is considered one day. If I get pink slipped on a Saturday, it does not start counting till Monday. And it's 24-hour period. So it's not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I get out. It's Monday. If I come in at 8, it's Monday to Tuesday at 8, Tuesday to Wednesday at 8, Wednesday to Thursday at 8. So it's a full 72 hours. At that point, a person can choose to sign in at any given time if we've determined, hey, because many times once you get the meds, they get a little stabilized, or even once they get used to, okay, I'm here now. If they can make the decision, they can sign in. If they are still unable to sign in or refuse to sign in, we can determine, are they probatable? Which means at that point, the court is engaged and we file probate papers with the court, and then that creates a whole nother process. You can also be pink slipped from the community. So that person who is in the street, standing in the middle of the street, talking and messing with traffic, the police or the crisis team can come. Many times it's the police, and then they'll call the crisis team. They'll do an assessment and they'll take them to the hospital. The hospital does what is to clarify so that physically they can come in and participate in treatment. So they medically clear them. And then they refer to the hospital or to the hospitals. They'll send it out, and whoever kind of takes first is
whoever may have a bed available.
Right.
Also, right. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And if they meet criteria and all of those things related to what is the acuity on the unit, all of that.
Okay.
At which point they will be brought by ambulance to the hospital. And at that point, it's automatically a lockdown when they come in. Right now, I would say probably 85% of our patients are pink slipped, and about 15 to 20%, 80, 85 pink slip, 15 to 20% are walk-ins.
Okay. Thank you for describing that and explaining the differences between the way a person can enter into treatment for themselves, or if they're pink slip, involuntary commitment. So we talked about the medical model of treatment and the clinical model of treatment. I would love for you to explain in our final time the biopsychosocial spiritual model of treatment. Okay. What is that?
So that is something that you will find almost exclusively in those who have faith. And I'm not saying a specific faith at this point, but those who see the world in what I call the four-part. So people are created biological. We are biological units. Our brain is a biochemical unit. So there's all the heart, the blood, the skin. That is our physical being. We have to take care of this physical being. Eating, food, hydration, medicines can help if I have blood pressure or different things going on. We have surgeries. We have all kinds of things that we do to take care of the biological part of our structure. Then we have the psychological. That's how our brain thinks. That's how we deal with our emotions. That's how we deal with trauma. That is in the psychological realm. Now, it's a little complicated because we know with trauma, the body keeps the score, so it kind of engages with the biological, so they're working together now. But there's a psychological model of treatment. Then there's the social. That has to deal with our relationships, created to be in relationship with other family systems, community systems, governmental systems, all of the things we have to deal with in our social life, work, all of that. Those three are generally always conceptualized when we're talking about treating any type of illness, specifically mental illness. Everyone thinks, okay, is this biological? Because I can tell you, you can have early onset diabetes, and it can create severe clinically significant anxiety. People who are preparing to have a heart attack oftentimes become depressed before they have the heart attack and anxious because the biology is sending messages. So if you treat in those cases the biological issues, guess what happens? Person is fine. Then you have the psychological. So that's where you're treating trauma. Your talk therapy is real good. Art therapy, music therapy, to help a person deal with anxiety when life happens.
Right.
And then you have the sociological, getting your friends, your people. You know, I saw growing up someone die. I saw a young man about 10 years old when I was about 14, literally get hit by a car and die almost in front of me. I saw a mugging. I saw a woman get her throat slit, and I was a kid at the time. And I was like, how come, and people are friends in school, we had friends that died. How come they didn't rush counselors in those days?
Right.
No one talked to us about nothing. It's like, suck a deal with it. And we were fine.
Right.
Then I thought about it. We had people. When the mugging happened, I had the next door neighbor. I could go over there. They would talk to me. We had people to talk to us, to process with us. We don't have that anymore. Hence, the resiliency isn't there. So now, guess what? The psychological illnesses are increasing because there's no sociological health. And if I have psychological illness and sociological, we know that that affects my body and my physical health. So they'll try to treat all of those. What many times isn't conceptualized is the spiritual. And I'm not saying at this point religious. I'm saying spiritual.
Right.
What I mean, there is a part of our creation, of who we are, that sets us apart from all other creation. Call it spirit, call it soul, whatever term you want to use. And there is a level of treatment there. And how I often describe it is this. I'll be sitting with a client, and I have my own belief system. I have my own worldview, but I'll sit with clients and I'll ask them, when you don't know what to do, you've tried everything, where do you go? I'll ask that simple question. And they'll go. And I'll say, the reason I'm asking that is I know for me, if I'm the be all and end all of everything, and humans are just like me, and I can't find the answer, the question for me, I ask myself is, where do I go? That might be a question you want to think about because you've been dealing with this for a long time. And it's been a system. And I don't care what level of acuity your psychological illness is. From the light, I don't have enough month at the end of my money, or I have too much month at the end of my money that's causing anxiety, to severe schizophrenia, bipolar.
Like a spectrum.
That question is important for everyone.
Yes.
So that is the area. And sadly, in community mental health, they actually are scared of the spiritual questions. We will literally have people that come in who want to integrate their faith. We've had patients who are Islamic. I've dealt with people who are Buddhist, and they come in, and there's no avenue for them to explore and utilize that in their health. Every culture on this planet has mental health care.
Right.
It just all doesn't look Western. There's music, there's movement, there's all kinds of things that help a person, and we know this more and more, that help a person with mental health issues. But the system in America, in the Western society, doesn't integrate well. So the biopsychosocial spiritual model is to encapsulate all of that.
I appreciate that explanation. And it reminds me of a documentary that I just recently rewatched, which is called Crazy Wise. And it talks about the different ways of tapping into spirituality and addressing mental health conditions. And it really does take a concerted, conscious effort to incorporate these different aspects of treatment and support in order for a person to implement the practices in their lives and have support of others that can help them to stay on track with implementing that. So it does take a commitment. It does take time and effort. And that alone could be something that's overwhelming and cause others to not engage.
Which is why you've got to take care of your own biopsychosocial spiritual.
Yes.
You have to do it because you can't walk through what this can entail, severe dealing with a loved one who has severe mental illness, if you're not taking care of you. You can't even work with them and help them. If I'm not taking care of me, I can't even sit in an environment where I'm helping them, where I'm able to give because I don't have anything to give. So you must, self-care is essential. Quick thing I wanted to just add free of charge. So if you ever wonder, do I need to go into the medical model or the clinical model related to, because there's all this talk about anxiety and depression. And severe anxiety and severe depression can lead to hospitalization. Mm-hmm. Here's what I often say is how you can unpack the difference. If you say, man, I'm really depressed or I'm really anxious, and I ask you, why are you anxious? And you can tell me, that's usually the clinical model. That's where you need to go first. If I ask, why are you depressed? And you can tell me, that is when you need to engage in the clinical model. If you say, I don't know, I just wake up anxious all the time, I don't even know why. I'm just down, I don't even know why. That's an indication you need the medical model. If you go into the medical model and it doesn't, and you're doing that and you get better, but you notice it's not working, that lets you know you need the medical and the clinical model. Mm-hmm. When you're dealing with schizophrenia or mania, it is similar, except the way to manage that. So you can have mild bipolar. If it's a mild bipolar, you may be able to enter into the clinical model and it be managed in that context. But the first time it goes over the top, that lets you know you need the medical. Same way with schizophrenia. When there are levels of schizophrenia that are not intense and that people don't go on that level of, I call them happy delusions. There are people that go away sometimes. I think my aunt was on if you would look at it as a spectrum, she probably was at the 8 or 9, or not even 9, probably at the 6, 7, or 8 in that range. Mm-hmm. She was very self-aware and she would manage. So sometimes she would say, I want to go off my meds for a while. And she would be good for months and months and months. And then it would click back in and she'd got to go to the hospital, and she'd go.
That's being very aware.
She was very aware. One time I was in the hospital, I went to visit her. She looked at me and says, honey, they say a mind is a terrible thing to waste, but I'm going to tell you, a mind's a terrible thing to lose.
So with that, Lance, I would like to know your top 3 suggestions for a family member, support person, friend, to help them with their self-care in being involved with this world and the ups and downs of it. Okay. The compliance and then the lack thereof, frustration, overwhelm. Top 3.
So, number 1, knowledge is power. Educate yourself to understand what this is. That is not just what the illness directly is, but what the system to treat the illness looks like. So you can lessen your frustration in having to deal with the system of trying to get your loved one care. So educate on the illness, educate on the treatment in the system. Number 2, take time for you. You are not Superman or Superwoman. You have your limits. Understand them. And when I say take time for you, develop friendships and relationships and support systems with people that understand what you're going through. It can be uncomfortable. It requires risk, but do it. And finally, know your limitations. At the end of the day, the loved one that you love so much is still an autonomous being that can make their own decisions.
Yes.
And you can't control anyone but yourself. Allow yourself the freedom of knowing that, and then the peace that comes with it, that you can help them a lot if they let you. But if they choose not to let you, there's a limit to what you can do, and you will continue to love them and care, but you might have to do it from a distance until they choose to allow you to help them.
Wow. Thank you, Lance. Thank you
so
so much for breaking all of this down, the different models of treatment, just the reality of this system, the frustration that can be involved in the system, and most importantly, the resources and the tips to help stay in the game and be
There you go.
your loved one's support system. So with that, I want to just tell you to tell your beautiful wife, Angela, I said hello. I think, was it her birthday or y'all just had an anniversary?
It was her birthday. We did the whole month of celebration.
Yeah, okay.
It was a milestone birthday. That's all I'll say, because my mom trained me well.
Okay. And then your sons, I try to keep up on Facebook. Somebody just started school. Or was that last year?
Well, he graduated and he went back. Both my sons will graduate, but my one decided he was going back and go back to school. So that was the one. Yeah, he just went back in after graduating from Bowling Green. Yep.
Tell him Ziggy Zumba, because I'm a Falcon as well.
Hey, Angela, my wife is a Falcon. So Falcons everywhere.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tell everyone I said hello. I would love for you to come back and talk more. But thank you for your time and all of the gems that you shared with us tonight.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the work that you do. And anytime, just reach out.
All right. Thank you.
Good day, everyone.